He didn't leave this to you because you never cared about him.
A homeless boy stood in front of a billionaire's coffin, holding a will that no one expected him to read. And when he spoke, the entire room went silent. Because the first sentence he said was, "You were never supposed to inherit anything." And just outside the cathedral, two furious heirs were already planning how to take it all back. Because what happened inside that room was only the beginning. Before we continue this story, welcome back. If you enjoy emotional stories about justice, truth, and unexpected twists, take a quick second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you think. And tell me something in the comments, where are you watching from today? Now, the moment everyone thought was the ending was actually the start of something far more dangerous. That same afternoon, inside a glass-walled office overlooking the city, Rebecca Carter slammed a stack of legal documents onto a table. "This isn't over," she said through clenched teeth. Andrew stood by the window, staring down at the streets below. Calm, calculating. "It was never going to be that easy," he replied. Rebecca paced back and forth. "He gave everything. To a homeless kid. A kid." Andrew turned slowly. "No, he gave it to a structure." Rebecca stopped. "What?" Andrew walked toward the table and tapped the documents. "A foundation," he said, "which means rules, which means oversight, which means control points." Rebecca's anger slowly shifted into focus. "You're saying we don't attack the will?" Andrew smirked slightly. "We attack the system around it." Rebecca's eyes lit up, and in that moment, the real battle began. Back across the city, Daniel sat in Edward Grant's office, staring at the foundation documents spread across the table. His fingers traced the pages slowly. Budgets, plans, locations, timelines. It wasn't just money. It was a blueprint for something massive. "Mr. Carter planned all of this," Daniel whispered. Edward nodded. "Every detail." Daniel swallowed. "I don't know if I can do this." Edward didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back and studied the boy carefully. "Good," he said finally. Daniel frowned. "Good," Edward nodded. "Because if you thought this was easy, you wouldn't be the right person." Daniel looked down again. "I'm not like him," Edward smiled slightly. "No," he said, "you're not." And then he leaned forward. "That's the point." Daniel sat quietly. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since the funeral. "What if I lose everything?" Edward didn't hesitate this time. "Then you start again." Daniel looked up. Edward's voice was calm. "Because people like you don't stay down." That night, Daniel walked alone through the city streets. Same streets he had slept on, same cold air, same broken sidewalks. But everything felt different now, because for the first time, he wasn't invisible. But somewhere behind him, danger was already moving. 3 days later, the first legal notice arrived. Edward placed the document on the table. "They filed a challenge," he said. Daniel's chest tightened. "On what?" Edward adjusted his glasses. "Your position." Daniel blinked. "They're claiming you're unqualified." Daniel looked down at his hands. "They're right." Edward shook his head. "No. Oh, they're strategic." Daniel looked confused. Edward continued. "They don't care about you. They care about control." Daniel sat back slowly. "So what happens now?" Edward gave a small, calm smile. "Now we fight." The courtroom was packed. Lawyers, reporters, observers. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. A homeless boy versus a billionaire family. Rebecca's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, this case is very simple," he said confidently. "A minor with no education, no financial experience, and no legal training has been placed in a position of control over billions of dollars." Murmurs spread through the room. He continued, "This is not just irresponsible, it is dangerous." Daniel sat still, hands clenched, heart pounding. Then Edward stood up, calm, unshaken. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is not about experience. It is about intent." And the room quieted. Edward walked slowly across the floor. Nathaniel Carter anticipated this challenge, he continued, which is why he prepared extensive documentation. He placed files on the table, including psychological evaluations, recorded statements, and legally binding structures, ensuring that no single individual has full control. The judge leaned forward slightly. Edward continued. The foundation is protected by a board, by legal safeguards, by oversight. He paused, and most importantly, by the clear and undeniable intent of its creator. Rebecca's lawyer stepped forward again. But intent does not equal competence. Edward didn't flinch. No, he said calmly, but character does. The room went silent. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Edward turned slightly and for the first time looked directly at Daniel. As Nathaniel Carter himself stated, he pressed a button. The screen lit up. Nathaniel appeared again, tired, but certain. If you're seeing this, his voice echoed, it means my children are trying to take this back. Gasps spread through the courtroom. Nathaniel continued. I chose Daniel not because he knows everything, he paused, but because he knows what it feels like to have nothing. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Nathaniel leaned closer to the camera, and that matters more than any degree. The video ended. No one spoke. Not even Rebecca. Not even Andrew. The judge looked down at the documents, then back at Daniel. And finally he spoke. The will stands. A single sentence. But it changed everything. Rebecca closed her eyes slowly. Andrew stared forward, expression cold. But inside they had lost. Again. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, microphones raised. Daniel, how does it feel to win? Daniel hesitated, then said something simple. It's not about winning. The crowd quieted. It's about doing what he asked. That line was on every headline the next morning, and something unexpected began to happen. People started supporting the foundation. Donations increased. Volunteers signed up. Teachers reached out. Within months, the first center opened. A small building, nothing fancy. But inside there were books, food, warm light, and children. Daniel stood quietly in the doorway, watching. A little boy sat at a table, reading slowly, finger moving across each line, just like he used to. Daniel smiled slightly. A teacher walked over. He comes here every day, she said. Daniel nodded. Does he like it? The teacher smiled. He says it helps him forget he's hungry. Daniel froze. For a moment he couldn't breathe, because those were his words, years ago, on a cold sidewalk. He walked over slowly, sat beside the boy. What are you reading? He asked gently. The boy looked up. Just like Daniel once had. A story, he said. Daniel smiled. Good choice. The boy hesitated, then asked, Do you think I can become someone important one day? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. The boy's eyes lit up. And in that moment, everything Nathaniel had built, everything he had believed, became real. Years passed. The foundation grew. More centers, more schools, more lives changed. And Daniel never forgot. One evening, he stood in front of a simple grave. No cameras, no crowd, just silence. You were right, he said softly. The wind moved through the trees. Opportunity changes lives. He placed an old book on the ground, worn, faded, but still there. A reminder of where everything began. He stepped back, looked at the sky, then turned and walked away. Because the story was never about money. It was never about revenge. It was about something much bigger. The truth that most people don't understand until it's too late. True wealth is not what you keep, it's what you give. And sometimes the person chosen to change the world is the one who once had nothing at all. If this story touched you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Daniel's place? And where are you watching from today? I'll see you in the next story. A homeless boy stood in front of a courtroom full of powerful people, and for the second time, he didn't run. Because this time, he understood something dangerous. They weren't trying to defeat him, they were trying to outlast him. And people like Rebecca and Andrew Carter didn't lose by force, they won by patience. Before we continue, welcome back. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a story about money, it's about choices. So take a quick second to like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always read them. Now, the judge's decision should have ended everything, but it didn't, because losing in court only changed Rebecca and Andrew's strategy. It didn't change their goal. 3 weeks after the ruling, Daniel received his first real warning, not from a lawyer, not from the court, but from inside his own foundation. It was late afternoon. Daniel sat in the main office, reviewing reports from the First Education Center, attendance numbers, food costs, teacher salaries. Everything had to be perfect, because now people were watching. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," Daniel said. A woman stepped inside, mid-30s, professional, calm. "I'm Sarah Collins," she said, "new financial advisor." Daniel nodded politely. Edward had mentioned they would be hiring more staff. "Nice to meet you," Daniel said. She smiled, but something about it felt rehearsed, too clean, too controlled. "I've been reviewing the foundation structure," she continued, placing a folder on the table. Daniel leaned forward. "What do you think?" She opened the folder slowly. "There are weaknesses." Daniel's chest tightened. "What kind?" Sarah looked directly at him. "Ones that can be exploited." Silence. Daniel didn't blink. "By who?" Sarah paused, then said something that made his stomach drop. "By people who understand systems better than you do." Daniel leaned back slowly, and in that moment, he understood. "They sent you?" Sarah didn't deny it. She simply closed the folder. "They're already inside," she said quietly. Daniel's heart started racing. "What do you mean?" Sarah stepped closer. "Board members." Daniel froze. Edward had selected them carefully, or at least he thought he had. Sarah continued. "2 of them are connected to Andrew." Daniel's voice dropped. "How?" "Indirectly," she said. "Investments, partnerships, quiet influence." Daniel stood up. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly. "Because I don't like what they're planning." Daniel searched her face. "You work for them." She nodded. "I did." Silence filled the room. Daniel asked carefully. "What are they planning?" Sarah's voice lowered. "They can't take the foundation directly," she pointed at the documents, "but they can slowly redirect it." Daniel frowned. "Redirect how?" "Funding decisions, project approvals, budget allocations." She met his eyes. "They can turn it into something it was never meant to be." Daniel's hands clenched, and make it fail. Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't need to, because they both knew that was exactly the plan. That night, Daniel sat alone in the empty office. Lights off, only the city glow coming through the window. The same question kept repeating in his mind. What if I'm not enough? He had won in court. But this wasn't a legal battle. This was a slow war, and he was outnumbered. A voice broke the silence. "You're thinking too small." Daniel turned. Edward stood in the doorway, calm as always. Daniel exhaled. "They're inside, Edward." Edward nodded. "I know." Daniel blinked. "You know?" Edward walked in slowly. "I've been waiting for them to make a move." Daniel stared at him. "You let this happen?" Edward shook his head. "No." He stopped in front of the desk. "I prepared for it." Daniel frowned. Edward placed another folder on the table. "You think Nathaniel Carter built a system that could be taken down this easily?" Daniel hesitated. Edward opened the folder. Inside, legal clauses, control mechanisms, hidden safeguards. "He designed layers," Edward said. Daniel leaned closer. "What kind of layers?" Edward smiled slightly. "The kind that activate when someone tries to break the rules." Daniel's heart started beating faster. "What happens if they do?" Edward looked directly at him. They expose themselves. The next board meeting came faster than expected. Large conference room, long table, 7 members. Daniel sat at the head, nervous but steady. Rebecca and Andrew weren't there. They didn't need to be. This was their game now. One of the board members leaned forward. "We need to reconsider the funding for the new education center." Daniel looked up. "Why?" The man adjusted his tie. "It's not profitable." Daniel blinked. "Profitable?" Another member spoke. We should invest in projects with higher financial return. Daniel's chest tightened. This isn't a business. The room went quiet. The first man smiled slightly. Everything is a business. Daniel felt the tension rise. This was it, the moment Sarah warned him about. They were trying to shift the foundation, turn it into something cold, something controlled. When Daniel looked down at the table, then slowly he spoke. That's not what Nathaniel wanted. The man leaned back. Nathaniel is gone. Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Daniel lifted his head, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in his voice. But I'm not. The room froze. Daniel reached into his folder and placed a document on the table. Edward's document. What is this? Someone asked. Daniel looked at them. A clause. The man frowned. For what? Daniel's voice was calm. For removing board members who act against the foundation's purpose. The room went completely silent. One of them laughed nervously. You're bluffing. Daniel slid another paper forward. Signed, stamped, legal. I'm not. The air changed instantly. The same man who had been confident seconds ago went pale. You can't do that. Daniel met his eyes. I can. Silence. No one moved. Then Daniel said the words that ended everything. And I will. 2 members were removed that day, immediately, legally, publicly. And just like Edward said, they exposed themselves. Connections to Andrew, financial links, hidden influence. It was all there. And now everyone could see it. Across the city in a high-rise office, Andrew Carter read the report in silence. Rebecca stood beside him. They failed, she said coldly. Andrew didn't respond. He just stared at the paper. Then slowly, he smiled. Not angry, not surprised, just interested. Good, he said quietly. Rebecca frowned. Good? Andrew looked up. Now I know how he thinks. Rebecca crossed her arms. So what now? Andrew folded the paper. Now we stop playing games. And for the first time, there was something different in his eyes. Not frustration, not anger. Something much worse. Yet focus. Back at the foundation, Daniel stood in the empty conference room, looking at the chairs, the table, the silence. He had won again. But it didn't feel like victory, because now he understood something important. They weren't testing the system anymore. They were testing him. Edward walked in quietly. You did well, he said. Daniel didn't turn. They're not done. Edward nodded. No. Daniel finally looked at him. So what happens next? Edward paused, then answered simply. Now they come for you directly. Daniel felt a chill run through his body, because deep down, he already knew. And somewhere in the city, Andrew Carter was already making that move. Not through courts, not through systems, but through something much harder to defend against, the past. And what Daniel didn't know yet was that everything he believed about his own life, it was about to be questioned. Because the next thing Andrew Carter would reveal wasn't about money. It was about who Daniel really was. And when that truth comes out, everything changes. Andrew Carter didn't attack the foundation. He attacked the one thing Daniel had never questioned, his past. And the moment the truth began to surface, Daniel realized this was never just about money. It was about identity. And once that breaks, everything else follows. The first sign came quietly. Not in a courtroom, not in a boardroom, but on a screen. A small headline buried between business articles and political noise. Mystery surrounds origins of Carter Foundation trustee. Daniel didn't see it at first, but others did. Whispers started, small at first, then louder. Reporters began asking questions they had never asked before. Where did Daniel Reyes really come from? Why are there no official records before age 10? Who were his parents really? And then one morning, Daniel walked into the foundation office and felt it instantly. People stopped talking when he passed. Eyes followed him, not with respect, but with doubt. He reached his desk and saw the envelope waiting there. No return address, no name, just his, written in sharp black ink. His hands hesitated for a second, then he opened it. Inside, a single photograph, old, slightly torn at the edges. Daniel looked down and his breath stopped. It was a picture of a woman holding a baby, The woman looked tired, but her eyes were familiar, too familiar. And the baby, Daniel's fingers tightened around the photo because the baby looked exactly like him. But that wasn't what froze him. It was what was written on the back. 3 simple words. Ask your father. Daniel dropped the photo onto the desk like it burned him, his mind racing. I don't have a father, he whispered, but deep inside something didn't feel right. That same day, the second strike came, not subtle this time, not quiet, a press conference live. Andrew Carter stood in front of cameras, calm, controlled, like a man who had been waiting for this moment. This foundation was built on trust, he said, but trust requires transparency. Reporters leaned in, cameras flashing, and I believe the public deserves to know who is really in control of billions of dollars meant for vulnerable children. A pause, just long enough to build tension, because as of today, there is no verified history of Daniel Reyes before he appeared on the streets. The room exploded. The questions shouted, voices overlapping. Andrew didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. No birth certificate, no school records, no family documentation, he continued. And yet somehow, he was chosen to lead one of the largest charitable foundations in the country. He stepped back slightly, letting the silence do the work. I'm not accusing, he said almost softly. I'm asking a simple question. Who is Daniel Reyes? Across the city, Daniel watched the screen in silence, the words echoing in his head. Who is Daniel Reyes? Edward turned off the television. The room felt heavy. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on nothing. It's not true, he said finally. But his voice didn't sound certain. Edward didn't respond immediately, and that silence said everything. Daniel looked up slowly. You knew, Edward sighed quietly. I suspected. Daniel stood up, anger rising. You suspected what? Edward met his eyes that there were gaps. Daniel shook his head. No, I remember things. I remember my parents. Edward nodded gently. Memories can be incomplete. Daniel's chest tightened. No, he said again, louder this time. They died. I told you that. Edward walked closer, his voice calm. And who told you that? The question hit harder than anything Andrew had said. Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped, because for the first time, he didn't know the answer. The room went silent, and in that silence, doubt began to grow. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The photograph sat on the table in front of him. He picked it up again, studying the woman's face. Something about her felt familiar. Not like a stranger, not like a memory, something in between. His heart started beating faster. Ask your father, he whispered. But there was no father. There never had been. Or at least, that's what he believed. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He walked into Edward's office, holding the photo. I need the truth, he said. Edward looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we start digging. What followed was not quick. Records were searched. When archives opened, old systems checked. Most of it led nowhere. Dead ends, missing files, incomplete data. Until 3 days later, Edward found something. Daniel, he said quietly, you need to see this. Daniel walked over, his heart already racing. Edward turned the screen toward him. It was an old hospital record, partially damaged, barely readable, but one name was clear. Elena Carter. Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't finish the sentence. Edward nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel shook his head. No, that's impossible. But the record continued. Beneath the name, a note, child survived. Daniel stepped back, the room spinning slightly. No, he whispered. No, that's not real. But deep down, something was breaking. Something he had held onto his entire life. What does this mean, he asked, his voice barely steady. And Edward didn't rush the answer. It means there was a child. Daniel's hands trembled. And? Edward looked at him carefully. And that child was never officially recorded after that. Silence, heavy, crushing silence. Daniel's mind raced, connecting pieces that didn't want to fit. You're saying? He stopped because even saying it felt impossible. Edward didn't finish the sentence for him. He didn't need to. Daniel turned away, running his hands through his hair. No, this doesn't make sense, but it did. And that was the worst part. Across the city, Andrew Carter stood by the window, watching the skyline. Rebecca walked in. "It's working," she said. Andrew didn't smile. "Of course it is." Rebecca crossed her arms. "So what now?" Andrew turned slowly. "Now?" he questions himself. Rebecca tilted her head. "And then?" Andrew's voice was cold. "Well, then he makes mistakes back in the office." Daniel sat alone again, the photo in one hand, the report in the other, two pieces of a puzzle he never asked for. "Who am I?" he whispered. And for the first time since everything began, he didn't have an answer. But somewhere deep inside, a memory flickered, not clear, not complete, just a feeling of a voice, soft, distant, calling his name. And suddenly, Daniel realized something terrifying. This wasn't just an attack. This was a revelation. And if Andrew was right, then everything Nathaniel had done, everything he had believed, might have been built on a truth no one had seen coming. Daniel stood up slowly, his decision forming, not out of fear, but out of something stronger. "I'm going to find out," he said. And this time, his voice didn't shake. Because whatever the truth was, he would face it. But what he didn't know yet was that Andrew Carter was already one step ahead. Because the next move wasn't just about exposing the past, it was about controlling the future. And when the final truth is revealed, it won't just change Daniel's life. It will rewrite the entire story. Daniel Reyes stood in the middle of a room filled with documents about his own life and realized something terrifying. None of them felt like they belonged to him, because the truth wasn't just hidden, it had been rewritten. And the moment he decided to uncover it, everything began to collapse. Not just around him, but inside him. Because some truths don't just answer questions, they destroy the person asking them. And this one was about to do exactly that. The next morning, Daniel didn't go to the foundation. He didn't call Edward. He didn't check the news. Instead, he went back to the only place that had ever felt real. The streets, the old bus station, the cracked sidewalk behind the library, the cold corner where he used to sleep. He stood there for a long time, just looking, trying to remember, trying to feel something familiar, something certain. But all he felt was doubt, and then a voice behind him. "You came back." Daniel turned slowly. An old man sat near the wall, wrapped in a worn coat, eyes sharp despite his age. Daniel stared at him. Something about him felt known. "Do I know you?" Daniel asked. The man smiled faintly. "You used to sit over there." He pointed to the corner, reading the same book every night. Daniel's heart skipped. "You remember me?" The man nodded, hard not to remember a kid who read in the dark. Daniel stepped closer. "Do you remember anything else about me?" The old man studied him carefully, then said something Daniel wasn't ready to hear. "You didn't come here alone." Silence. Daniel's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" The man leaned forward slightly. "There was a woman." Daniel felt the world slow down. "What woman?" The man's voice softened. "She used to watch you from across the street. Never came close, just watch." Daniel shook his head. No, I would remember that." The man didn't argue. He just said quietly, "You were very sick back then. You didn't notice much." Daniel stepped back, his mind racing. "What happened to her?" The old man looked away. "She stopped coming one day." Daniel's voice dropped. "Did she talk to you?" The man nodded slowly. "Once." Daniel leaned forward. "What did she say?" The old man hesitated, then answered. "She said, 'Make sure he survives, no matter what.'" Daniel froze because those words didn't feel like something a stranger would say. They felt like something a mother would say. Daniel turned and walked away without another word, his thoughts colliding, his breathing uneven, because now the past wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with something worse. Pieces, fragments, hints of a life he never knew existed. That same afternoon, Daniel went back to Edward, placed everything on the table, the photo, the record, the memory, Tell me the truth, he said. Edward looked at him for a long time. Then finally he nodded. There is something I didn't tell you. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. What? Edward took a slow breath. Nathaniel Carter didn't just choose you because of who you are. He paused. He chose you because of who you might be. Daniel's voice dropped. Say it clearly. Edward met his eyes. There is a possibility that you are his son. The room went completely silent. No sound, no movement. Just one sentence hanging in the air. Heavy, impossible. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not funny, Edward didn't respond. Daniel's voice rose. That's not possible. Edward stayed calm. The timeline matches. Daniel shook his head. No, his wife died years ago. Edward nodded slowly. That's what everyone believes. Daniel stepped back. What are you saying? Edward opened another file inside. A private investigation Nathaniel had conducted before his death. Photographs, records, hidden documents. Elena Carter's accident, Edward said quietly, was not as simple as it seemed. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She didn't die, did she? Edward didn't answer immediately, and that silence confirmed everything, Daniel whispered. She survived, Edward nodded once. For a time, Daniel's hands started shaking. And the child? Edward's voice softened. The child disappeared from all official records. The same way you did? Daniel staggered slightly, grabbing the edge of the table. Because now, it wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a possibility, a terrifying, life-changing possibility. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Edward's expression was heavy. Because Nathaniel wasn't sure. Daniel looked up. And now? Edward answered quietly. Now. When Andrew is forcing the truth out, as if on cue, Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello? A voice came through, calm, controlled, familiar. You're getting close, Andrew Carter. Daniel's jaw tightened. What do you want? Andrew's voice didn't change. The truth, Daniel snapped. Then say it. A pause, then Andrew spoke slowly, each word precise. You're not just some random boy he found on the street. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. You're the mistake he tried to bury. Silence, sharp and suffocating, Daniel whispered. You're lying, Andrew chuckled softly. Then prove it. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. Why are you doing this? Andrew's voice turned cold. Because everything he gave you was never meant for you. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to steady himself. And who was it meant for? Andrew answered without hesitation. Family. The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly, his hands shaking. Because now, the fight wasn't about control. It wasn't about money. It was about identity, about blood, about a truth that could either destroy him or redefine everything. Edward stepped closer. Daniel, listen to me. Daniel didn't look at him. If this is true, then everything changes. Edward nodded. Yes, Daniel whispered. Then why do I feel like I'm losing everything? Edward's voice was calm but firm. Because you're still thinking like the boy who had nothing. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes different now, sharper, stronger. Then I need to stop thinking like that. Edward gave a small nod. Exactly. Daniel took a slow breath, then said something that shifted everything again. If I'm really his son, then this foundation isn't just his legacy. He paused. It's mine. Edward didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes, something like approval, because in that moment, Daniel wasn't reacting anymore. He was deciding. Across the city, Andrew Carter stood in his office, looking at the same skyline. Rebecca walked in. Did you tell him? Andrew nodded. Enough. Rebecca crossed her arms. And now? Andrew turned slightly, his voice low, dangerous. Now he comes to me, back in the office. Daniel picked up the photo again, looked at the woman's face, then made his decision. Set up a meeting, he said. Edward frowned. With who? Daniel's voice was steady now, no fear left. Andrew Carter, because the next part of the story wasn't going to be hidden in documents or whispered through lies. It was going to be face to face, truth against truth, a past against present, and when that meeting happens, only one version of the story will survive. Daniel Reyes walked into the tallest building in the city, not as a homeless boy, not as a trustee, but as someone about to face the one man who might know the truth about his entire life. And for the first time since this began, he wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing who he thought he was. The elevator doors opened slowly. Top floor, silence, glass walls, the city stretching endlessly behind them. Andrew Carter stood by the window, hands in his pockets, calm, waiting, like he knew this moment would come. "You took your time," Andrew said without turning. Daniel stepped forward, steady, controlled. "I came for the truth." Andrew smiled faintly, still facing the city. "No, you came because you're starting to believe it." Daniel didn't respond because that part was true. Andrew turned slowly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because this wasn't just a conversation. It was a collision. "Say it," Daniel said finally. "All of it." Andrew walked toward the table, picked up a folder, and placed it down between them. "You were never supposed to exist," he said calmly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." Andrew opened the folder. Inside, photographs, medical records, letters, things that had been hidden for years. "My father had a perfect life," Andrew continued. "Perfect image, perfect family, perfect reputation." Daniel's eyes scanned the papers, his hands steady, but his heart racing. Until he met someone he wasn't supposed to, Andrew's voice remained cold. Elena wasn't just his wife. She was the problem. Daniel looked up sharply. "And watch how you talk about her." Andrew smirked slightly. "You care about her already? Interesting." Daniel stepped closer. "What happened?" Andrew leaned back slightly. "She got pregnant." Silence, heavy, undeniable. Daniel's chest tightened. "With me?" Andrew shook his head slowly. "No, with you." The world seemed to stop for a second. Daniel stared at him, not blinking, not breathing. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked certainty. Andrew didn't react. The timeline, the records, the disappearance, it all fits. Daniel shook his head again. "Then why was I on the street?" Andrew's eyes darkened. "Because you weren't supposed to be seen." Daniel stepped back slightly. "Explain." Andrew walked closer, lowering his voice. "When my grandmother found out, she made sure Elena disappeared." Daniel felt his chest tighten again. "The accident?" Andrew nodded. "Mum, wasn't an accident." Daniel's hands clenched. "And me?" Andrew's expression didn't change. "You survived." Daniel's voice dropped. "And then?" Andrew answered simply. "You were removed." Silence filled the room. Daniel whispered, "Thrown away." Andrew didn't correct him, because that word was accurate. Daniel turned away, running his hand through his hair, trying to process something that didn't feel real. "And Nathaniel?" Andrew's voice softened slightly. "He didn't know. Not at first." Daniel turned back. "Then how did he find me?" Andrew looked at him carefully. "He never stopped looking." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Daniel's breathing slowed. "He knew?" Andrew nodded. "Not completely, but enough." Daniel looked down at the documents again. "So the day he met me wasn't random." Andrew shook his head. "Nothing about it was random." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, because now everything made sense. The way Nathaniel looked at him, the way he trusted him, the way he chose him. It wasn't just kindness. It was something deeper, something unspoken, something he himself may not have fully understood. Daniel opened his eyes again. "Then why didn't he tell me?" Andrew's voice turned sharp again, "Because the truth would destroy everything." Daniel frowned. "Everything?" Andrew gestured around the room. "The company, the reputation, the legacy." Daniel stepped forward. "So he chose silence." Andrew nodded. Until the end. Daniel's chest tightened, because now he understood the will, the decision, the trust. It wasn't just about character. It was about blood. But Daniel's voice didn't break. It hardened. Then why are you telling me now? Andrew smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in it, because you don't belong in his world. Daniel stared at him. I am his world. Andrew's expression shifted, just slightly. No, he said quietly. You're the part of it he tried to hide. Silence thick and dangerous. Daniel stepped closer, his voice calm but unshakable. And you're the part that failed him, that landed. Andrew's jaw tightened for the first time. Daniel continued. He gave you everything, and you turned it into nothing. Andrew's eyes hardened. Careful? Daniel didn't stop. He gave me nothing, and I turned it into everything. The room went completely still. Andrew looked at him, really looked at him now. Not as a problem, not as an obstacle, but as something else, something real. You think that makes you better than me? Andrew asked quietly. Daniel shook his head. No, he said. It makes me different. Silence again, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was heavy with truth. Daniel reached down, closed the folder, and pushed it back toward Andrew. You wanted to break me, he said, but all you did was show me who I am. Andrew didn't respond. Daniel turned toward the door, then stopped. I don't need your approval, he added. And I don't need your name, he paused just for a second. But I will protect his legacy, whether you like it or not. And then he walked away. No hesitation, no doubt, just clarity. Because now he knew, not every truth destroys you. Some truths build you, and this one had just made him stronger than ever. Andrew stood alone in the room, staring at the closed door. For the first time since this began, he wasn't in control. And that realization stayed with him across the city. Daniel stepped out into the sunlight, the same city, the same streets. But everything felt different now, not because the world had changed, but because he had. He looked up at the sky, took a slow breath, and for the first time, he said it out loud. Not as a question, but as a fact. I know who I am. And that was something no one could take from him anymore. Years later, the Elena Carter Foundation became one of the most impactful organizations in the country. Thousands of children educated, fed, protected, given opportunities they never had before. And at the entrance of every building, a simple line remained. Opportunity changes lives, Nathaniel Carter. But the people who knew the full story knew something else. The real legacy wasn't the money. It wasn't the foundation. It wasn't even the shocking will. It was the truth that came after, that sometimes the person chosen to carry a legacy isn't the one born into it, but the one who understands it, and Daniel understood it better than anyone. If this story made you think, take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Daniel? And where are you watching from today? Because stories like this remind us that the most powerful thing you can ever own isn't money, it's who you choose to become.